I think with connectivity, with IoT, there's two costs to connectivity. One is the fact that there is actually like a silicon cost. IoT products cost more than non-IoT products because you have to add stuff to it. But second, and I actually think this is more important, there's a management cost. Machines that aren't offline are very reliable and resilient. Wireless connectivity is inherently unreliable. Connections come and go for various reasons. And so that becomes something you have to manage. So the question is, why should I take on that management burden?
Hello, my name is Robert Schmidt. Welcome to another Coffee with Mr. IoT. I'm Deloitte's Chief IoT Technologist, and today on my show, I have as our guest Zach Supalla, who is the CEO and founder of Particle. Zach, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm very honored to have you on.
Thanks for having me. Great to chat.
Zach, what's Particle? For the few people that watch the show that don't know, because obviously once you're in IoT, you know Particle.
Particle is an integrated IoT platform. So we, the very end of the day, we help companies who make widgets turn their widgets into internet connected widgets. I sometimes describe our product as saying, if you want to build a product but you are not, Particle provides a technology stack that makes it possible to create products like that, hardware, software, connectivity, all integrated into one platform that is designed to solve all of the technical challenges associated with bringing an IoT product to market.
So Zach, I have to ask you a question, and please, maybe that's controversial and maybe it's not, but I just find so many people call themselves a platform.
Mm-hmm.
Platform has become such a buzzword. Mm-hmm. Why do you call yourself a platform, I guess, is my question one, when there's so many people do talk about it, and what makes you a platform? Because I know you are, and I don't want to downplay what you do. I just want you to give you a chance to sort of talk about this, because there's just so much talk about platforms.
So it's funny, IoT platform. I hate the term IoT. I hate the term platform, and we call ourselves an IoT platform. And I think, but here we are. And we have had points in the past where we dropped both terms. Early on in the company's history, we talked about connected devices. We refused to use the term IoT, and we've often debated: are we a platform? Are we a solution? Are we a product? What are we? And I think that the word platform has come to be a word that people like to use because it suggests that you're building a valuable business, right? It's a Y Combinator and the startup community loves platforms. But if we really go to the definition of the term, it's something somebody else can stand on, right? Which is, I think of the key of what makes somebody a platform is, are you building something that enables others to achieve more? And the Particle is very much that for our customers. We are providing what is necessary for them to build IoT products, and so we are the platform they stand on to make it possible to create these kinds of products. That said, it is buzzwordy and has become increasingly meaningless as a term. It is still a thing people Google, and so there is an aspect of it which is simply just being. When people are searching for something, that is still what they're searching for. And so, of course, we want to make sure that we get found and by the people who are looking for us.
I find it funny that you start saying that you hate both IoT and platform as words. One of my taglines is, I hope we're going to soon get to the place where we don't call it Internet of Things anymore, but we're going back to calling it the Internet, because there was never an Internet of the people, right? I mean, it's so funny if you think about it, right? Did you ever know of an IOP? I don't.
I know. And things also is just this word that it's so it really plays the whole thing down, right? Machines, equipment, right? There's bigger and more important words for things. But the term is the term. It has settled in.
But you know what I love? You said something I'd actually not heard before, and it sort of really, it sunk in with me. A platform is something you stand on. And
Hmm.
I had never actually thought of it this way. And, you know, truthfully said, I do actually like the word platform, because for me, a platform is way more than a product.
Mm.
It's way more than a solution. It's actually, as you said, a platform for many things. And
Mhm.
so I love the word platform. It's just such an unfortunate thing that it's gotten such a buzzword. I
Mm.
actually want to ask you one more thing about you in general, which is sort of different about you. You are hardware and software.
Mhm.
And so, talk a little bit about the hardware aspect of it, because maybe people, well, I sort of get the software aspect of it, and probably I'm simplifying it. But let's talk about the hardware side a little bit, because you're different in that sense too.
Yeah. I mean, I think if we really step back and think about the problems in IoT, the technical challenges, and it really even tying it back to what is the opportunity that most companies are considering. There's a lot of reasons that people pursue IoT initiatives, build IoT products. Um, but I would say the most common that we see is just some general ability to gain visibility and insight into what's happening in the physical world, right? So I have assets, I have physical operations, I might have trucks or products I've shipped to customers. Historically, I've never had any visibility into what's happening there. I can see now, right? I can all of a sudden connect those parts of the physical world into my IT systems, my data infrastructure. I can see things I couldn't see before. Um, most most platforms in IoT are really focused on what you do with that data when it's generated. And I think that some of the reason for that is because this is the world we've gotten used to with the web. Click data, right? We have because of the way that the web works, we now have a lot of visibility into how people do things, how people shop, how people consume media in a way that we've never had before. And click data is easy to get from the web because you just track, you put a little JavaScript thing in there and you track somebody's behavior, and all of a sudden you have this wealth of information. And so I think there were a lot of companies who popped up to apply that concept to IoT and say, well, we can do the same thing. We can just take all the information coming out of these machines and we can turn it into insight for customers. But the big difference was most machines in 2020 are still not connected. We're living in a world where 5 billion of the 7 billion people in the world have some form of internet connectivity, but the vast majority of machines that are around us are still offline. And so one's ability to turn data into insight is limited if there's no data. And so we really focused on figuring out not starting from how do we generate insight from data, but how do we generate data in the first place? How do we actually get information out of things, machines, equipment, whatever it is? And in order to solve that problem, you have to get into hardware. There's no way to avoid it. It's part of what's required to do the job. You have to put a chip in, and you have to have a radio, and you have to have things like SIM cards and data plans, and you have to deal with networking and routing and RF interference and antennas and certifications and all these really messy problems, which I think most companies avoid because they're messy. And whereas we embrace them, we sort of say that's our job. The reason we exist is to take the hard things and make them easier. And so what others see as a risk or as a challenge, we see as a opportunity.
So I think we're quickly getting into edge and stuff like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
You really about connecting, talking about the hardware itself. But many companies that make things aren't into that space. They are into making the best product. What changes when you start connecting things? And maybe what we should get into, let's talk about um, true use cases. Maybe you mentioned some example that you can mention and that you like to talk about. And then let's talk about an example that you can't mention the company, but that you're really fascinated by.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm going to get some really interesting stuff out of you without mentioning the company or something like that.
So we definitely have a lot of interesting stories to tell of use cases. I think IoT is a fascinating market because the use cases are just all over the place. And I'll give an example of one that is customer that we've done case studies with in the consumer space. Most of our customers are industrial in some sense, and so they're not generally well-known brands. But one of the more well-known companies we work with is Jacuzzi. Jacuzzi is the largest hot tub manufacturer, in many ways synonymous with hot tubs. They have a product that's called the Jacuzzi Smart Tub. which is increasingly becoming part of all of their products they deliver to market. Particle powers that product. And we started working with them a number of years ago in the creation of that initiative in what really started as a conversation of why should you connect a hot tub to the internet in the first place, right? Because I think with a lot of consumer products, I'm not a huge fan of consumer IoT in general, because I think a lot of times it is companies with a hammer looking for a nail, saying I can connect things, but not asking why. And a lot of consumers have rejected many of those products because they don't actually solve real problems for them. And many of those companies have been challenged as a result. So when we're talking to a consumer product company, which Jacuzzi is, the first question is why. And what they said is, a hot tub is, for anybody who owns one of the largest consumers of energy in the house. It also takes a long time to heat up. So people tend to do one of two things. They either leave it on all the time, which is a huge energy suck, or they leave it off all the time, which means they never use it. So having connectivity means you can change the temperature. You can set it before you need it, and then turn it off after you need it. And that ends up being really, really important for their business, for their customers, and the big energy savings opportunity. And then second, it's also a machine that requires a lot of maintenance. The experience of owning a hot tub is supposed to be a luxury. It's a luxury product. It's a massage, right? And in many cases, it's sort of physical therapy, right? For folks, that's where it really started, was a physical therapy product. But the actual day-to-day experience is often a maintenance challenge, right? It's chemicals, it's power management, it's making sure it gets covered and uncovered at the right time. And they see a lot of what they need to do is eliminating the maintenance burden of saying, how do we get it to be actually the luxury experience that it's expected to be? And so there's a bunch of really great work they've done to be able to improve maintenance by getting better information out of the hot tubs. And so that's a great example of, a very consumer facing customer of ours. Some of the things that we do that are more hidden, I guess. I think a lot of what I find fascinating about IoT is obscure use cases you'd never dream of, but they're out there and they're more important than you realize. We have a customer who uses Particle to monitor manhole covers to prevent explosions. So there is a certain...
One more time. Sorry. Manhole covers.
Yes.
To avoid explosions. Okay.
So like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle style manhole covers that, which are ubiquitous, they're everywhere. Some number of them are over gas lines. And there is a thing that happens, unfortunately, more frequently than one would like, which is that if there's a gas leak in the gas lines underneath the manhole cover, gas will build up in the space underneath. And then at some point there's a spark and the manhole cover explodes off of the ground.
This is not funny. I'm sorry, but I'm still laughing.
I know it's not funny. It's terrible, but it's funny. It's big, it's heavy. It creates a ton of damage on its way up and a ton of damage on its way back down. And so they put a sensor under the manhole cover with an antenna that goes above to be able to monitor gas, so they can see if there's a leak, and then somebody can go out and repair the leak before there's a spark and before there becomes explosive energy. So, super consumer on one side, super industrial hidden problems on the other side.
That's super interesting. So what I love about the jacuzzi example, right, and why you talk about this, and when I think about this, my first thought was like, well, I'll just put a switch in the outlet, and I was like, yeah, that's not gonna work. And so I thought about this, but the thing that always fascinates me about these products is that before, Jacuzzi sold the product to distributor, a store where I bought it, and then I had it at home and I went to the store. Now, Jacuzzi actually is directly interacting with me, right? Mm-hmm. So now they've actually become a much different company where they're actually becoming a B2C company. Mm-hmm. What do you see around this? Sort of like, how do you help them? Because it's not just the technology of, you talk about, right, particle in the jacuzzi. It's about on and off. It's about chemical. It's about this kind of thing. But it's also they got to give me an experience now on the end. How does this work with Particle? How do you help them with them? How does that go? And yeah.
I mean, one of the things we've become an expert in is sort of a little bit of pattern matching in IoT and sort of business models use and sort of revenue streams associated with IoT. So when we're starting to talk to somebody about IoT, as I mentioned, the first thing we're asking is why, right? In any context, the first question is, why are you connecting this thing? What's it going to do for you, your business, your customers? And we've built a framework that we use internally called the 6 ways of making money in IoT. So we did this as an analysis. We looked at all of our customers across these huge variety of use cases. So for context, we have 250,000 developers and engineers who've prototyped with Particle, representing 8,500 companies. We have hundreds of customers that have deployed products at scale on the platform. So we have very broad visibility into the market. And so a couple of years ago, we looked at our customer base and said, can we bucket them, right? It's a lot of industries, it's a lot of use cases, but is there some commonality in terms of what they're trying to achieve? And we discovered what we call the six ways of making money, which is the sort of 6 use cases. So asset tracking, predictive maintenance. Oh man, every time I try and do this from memory, asset tracking, predictive maintenance, compliance and regulatory compliance, environmental sensing, consumer upsell, and consumables fulfillment. So we basically said, like, turns out there's really only 6 reasons. And so we built a framework to say, we will then engage with customers and run them through this list and say, in what ways might you be able to apply asset tracking? And we'll go through the list. Usually there's one primary, the primary source of value, and then there's a bunch of secondary sources of value. And so we'll then work with them to figure out, okay, how are you going to identify and pursue this primary source of value, and which of the secondary sources of value do you want to invest in out of the gate versus start to become like second horizon, third horizon, continued investment in the product over time.
So I want to play a game with you, and I'm trying to just sort of like, you said this not twice, and I love it, by the way, this asking the why. But I sit here and I say, why not? I have an expectation. It's so interesting that you said, I'm not a good IoT consumer. I don't like connected devices. I'm the opposite. If I did buy a device that's more than $100 and I'm not connected in some form or fashion to the people who sell it, I'm kind of like, well, you suck. Excuse my French, but you know what I mean? And so tell me, why not connect things? Why would I not? I mean, the thing that I notice is that I find my clients and customers, they find out things about the usage of the product and a lot of things around that they don't know today, and they can now interact with me. I sort of have an expectation that they know me and they treat me and they give me what I need rather than the other way around. So I don't know, why not?
So perhaps as a response to some of the early patterns of the industry, Particle's been around since 2012.
Yeah, you started early. Yeah,
and
you've been around before that.
So we've seen like what I would just, the hype cycle we followed. Gartner would currently say IoT is in the like climbing out of the Trough of Disillusionment. That's where, as of 2020, that's where they put the dot on their hype cycle. I think that's totally accurate. And I think that 2012 to 2015 was the surge of hype. And then 2015 to now, to maybe 2018 was the sort of Trough of Disillusionment. And then the last couple of years, we've been climbing out. And the reason that I think that it came and went. So I think a lot of the perspective on IoT came from Nest. I think Nest was a very inspirational company. It was for me. That's when I started the company. I was building Nest for lighting. Before we became a platform, we launched a lighting product on Kickstarter. Never funded, didn't go anywhere, never existed. But the inspiration for that product is that my dad is deaf. I wanted to make his lights flash when my mom sent him a text message. And I was interested in the ways that you could apply connectivity to lighting. And I learned that product was not successfully funded. And I learned that out of that experience, there's a cost benefit analysis that consumers, we do in our head. Businesses do it in spreadsheets. And consumers do it in a much more emotional way in our heads, right? Where we're trying to figure out how much value we're going to get out of something and whether it's worth the money. And I think with connectivity, with IoT, there's two costs to connectivity. One is the fact that there is actually like a silicon cost. IoT products cost more than non-IoT products because you have to add stuff to it. But second, and I actually think this is more important, there's a management cost. Machines that aren't offline are very reliable and resilient. Wireless connectivity is inherently unreliable. Connections come and go for various reasons. And so that becomes something you have to manage. So the question is, why should I take on that management burden, right? I have to overcome that. And with the case of lighting, the combination of the fact that every light would be more expensive and people have on average 52 lights in their home means the cost is high. And so the value better be damn high. Otherwise, it's not going to fly. Even if you can create some value, it may not be enough. And I think that killed a lot of consumer IoT companies in that 2012, 2015, because they weren't asking why, they were just doing.
Got it.
And I think that's not to say that there aren't compelling whys, but too many people I see sort of start going before asking the question. And eventually those products fail. They might fail later. Somebody might be willing to spend $1 million on one of these initiatives before it fails, but it will eventually fail if they haven't really asked why and figure out what problem they're trying to solve in order to apply the technology successfully to solve that problem.
It's a super interesting conversation for me. Thank you for humoring me, and I appreciate it. By the way, the story why you started it with your dad, those are the tidbits I love to hear, right? Because this sort of like there's always a personal aspect where you go at this. And
yes, my parents continue to be mad at me, by the way, for never having delivered that product. So my dad has an Apple Watch now.
You could deliver it now, actually. You could give it to your dad. I mean, I know you could figure this out, but
I tried to hack it one Christmas when I was home, and I ended up blowing up one of their circuits in their electric, and they were like, "Please stop. Thank you for trying. You are now disinvited from doing this again."
That's funny. That's funny. So let's close with today and where we are and what's going on out there. I feel like you can't talk about technology in today without talking a little bit about how has COVID affected you and your company and you personally, and what do you see happening around this, particularly in change? I just saw this super interesting comic yesterday. Someone had it on a call where there was a conference room and they were sitting and they were talking about how they don't have to think about digital transformation, and outside was this big ball hanging, swinging towards them called COVID. I can send it to you, but maybe we can cut it in when we do this. But that's just curious. How has COVID affected you, and what's been sort of like the change that happened for you, for your company, and for IoT in general, you think?
I mean, 2020 was a bizarre year for every business. And I think, looking at the startup landscape, the world ranged from, companies doing video conferencing software that had the best year ever to companies doing hospitality that just got decimated, right? I think IoT sort of falls into the space in between, where there were a lot of operational challenges in the year due to supply chain constraints in the market, often driven by COVID. Manufacturers shut down for a while, especially in the first phase, in the US in the first phase of rollout. Generally, like geographic issues. We, for instance, manufacture in China and Vietnam. We had been moving manufacturing into Vietnam because of tariffs before all of this happened. And then we moved everything back into China because China's done a very good job, although they might have had challenges in the very beginning. They've done a very good job of managing the virus since. And so we've been able to continue to manufacture effectively through in Shenzhen, which is where our manufacturing facilities are located. So it's been kind of a crazy year. I think the funny thing about our business is it sort of ended up the same as it was going to be beforehand, but in a totally different way. because we had some customers who were really challenged and others who were solving problems directly relating to COVID that have been extremely well. And so, for instance, one of our big use cases is micromobility. We have a bunch of customers. We power a number of the larger micromobility deployments around the world. Many of those customers have been challenged.
Say
But what's
again,
interesting,
micro what? I
sorry,
couldn't hear you.
micromobility. So like the scooter and bike sharing
Micromobility. Got it. Yeah.
companies that, were, scooters on every street corner for a while there. Now, most of us haven't probably been out checking out the street corners, but those products are not being used because people aren't moving around that much. And so generally micromobility has been a really challenged market. And so a lot of our customers there have shrunk or even gone out of business. And we've had some customers who have really carved a path through, but it has been a really, really challenging space. On the other hand, we have customers who do air filtration and air purification that have done spectacularly well. We have a customer called Aura Air that's an Israeli company that makes an air purification system that's specifically targeted at removing viruses from the air. And the guys who founded it, I think very prescient, decided for years have been saying, they had been focusing on influenza and saying we can filter influenza virus out of the air, but their whole pitch was like, guys, one day there's going to be a global pandemic, and people are going to start to realize how important it is to manage air quality. And then it happened, and they basically are saying, look, we were right. They were doing tests with hospital systems in Israel to show that they could filter COVID-19 out of the air as effectively, or SARS-CoV-2, whatever you actually call the virus, as effectively as they could filter out influenza. And so they've done unbelievably well this year. And we've also found ourselves in these really interesting use cases where we have a customer named Dynamis who uses Particle to support the Air National Guard. So they make a little tracker called a Cobra tracker that is used by the Air National Guard when they're going out. It's for people tracking when they're going out to, like, there's a hurricane and they're going and trying to grab people off the roofs of their houses. They hand them these personal trackers so they can make sure that person finds their way back to the center that they've set up for sort of processing all these folks and getting them what they need. So they had these trackers. When COVID hit, the Air Force was responsible for handling distribution of ventilators state to state. So when we were running out of ventilators, states were lending their ventilators to other states. The Air Force was managing the logistics of getting those ventilators around, and they used the trackers to track the location of all of the ventilators. And so, I think that there's been a lot of just interesting, like, let's reapply this technology in a different way to try and solve a problem that's in front of us now with urgency. We're starting to do more work with vaccine delivery and distribution to maintain low temperatures of the vaccines, which has been, is definitely a challenge, a logistical challenge specifically for the vaccines that are being deployed widely. So yeah, it's been a fascinating year. Some businesses challenged, others finding great and important use cases associated with COVID and our recovery from it.
So you have a conference coming up. I hope we're going to get this out before the conference. When is it? And tell us about it. Where do I need to go to sign up?
Yeah, absolutely. So Particle runs an annual conference called Spectra. Once upon a time, this was an in-person conference. It's now virtual. I think we'll never go back. We went from having hundreds of people show up in person to thousands of people show up online. And thousands. I love that we can now make it a free virtual event that anybody can attend. Spectra this year is on March 17th. And if you're interested, spectra.particle.io. The theme this year is IoT Masterclass. So it's all about what does it actually take to bring an IoT product to market. We have 101, 201, 301 style classes to teach people basic concepts of all the necessary technical and business skills to bring an IoT product to market. So yeah, if you're interested, Spectra, spectra.particle.io.
Awesome. Zach, it was really a pleasure talking with you, hearing about all these different things, and thanks for being here. Any closing comments before we get on?
No, I think, if for folks out there who are in this space, it's a great time to be getting into IoT or investing in this stuff. I do think the market is just on the precipice of taking off. So it's exactly the right time to get in, but make sure you ask why you're doing it.
Zach, thank you so much. And with that, we have another coffee chat coming to an end. I appreciate you watching. And if you missed any of today's shows or past shows, check out our playlist on YouTube or other podcasts. And with that, I'm going to say have a good one and goodbye.